a gunpowder and whiskey, to aromas that for Jeremy Cullen, a former marshal and now a simple old gunfighter, became the only meaning in life. He sat in the shade of his ranch porch, the creaking rocking chair his only faithful companion for the last 10 years, since his wife, Sarah, passed away. With her, the colors and sounds left too. The world had turned into a monochrome, dusty western, where the only plot was a slow, inevitable decay. The dust now gathered on the colt hanging on the wall, which once brought order to the entire county, instead of fear. Jeremy was the embodiment of the Wild West's autumn, with wrinkles like canyons, and eyes where it seemed the last sunsets had faded. He had lost not only Sarah, but also himself, his fire, his belief that tomorrow could be better than today. His life was a pain that he had learned to coexist with, like a chronic illness. The town of Bright Creek, which was just a collection of a dozen houses and a saloon, had long not seen change. Life here flowed like a dried-up river, slowly, submissively, apathetically, until a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It was rushing towards the town with unusual speed, and soon 2 carriages drawn by the best horses emerged from it. This was not a regular visit. From the first carriage, gleaming with varnish and gilding, she emerged. Her name was Isabella Montgomery, and her name was on everyone's lips from San Francisco to New York, a leading actress whose beauty seemed to be carved from marble itself, and whose eyes shone as if all the lights of Broadway were reflected in them. She wore a dress that didn't fit the local fashion. It was light, bright, revealing her slender figure. In her hands was a parasol protecting her from the scorching sun. She had arrived with an entire film crew to shoot a movie about life in the Wild West. Isabella was a surprise to everyone who saw her. The men in town, accustomed to harsh and resilient women, simply froze. They looked at her like a miracle, at something that shouldn't exist in this harsh world. Isabella was like a bird that had flown into a cage where all the other inhabitants had long forgotten what the sky was. She was not like Sarah, neither in appearance nor in spirit. Sarah was a strong and silent woman, capable of enduring all the hardships of life on the frontier. Isabella, on the other hand, was the epitome of fragility and grace, but her eyes showed a captivating strength. Jeremy, sitting on his porch, watched this spectacle. There was no curiosity or admiration in his eyes, only fatigue. He saw in her just another fleeting shadow that would pass through his life without leaving a trace. But Isabella was different. She immediately noticed him, an old, grey-haired man who seemed so lonely, so lost. In his eyes, she saw not just fatigue, but a deep pain, a pain that she, as an actress accustomed to studying human emotions, immediately recognized, and this compassion became her first step towards him. She walked up to him, bypassing puddles and dust that seemed alien to her delicate boots. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice like a melody that shouldn't sound in this backwater. "I'm Isabella Montgomery. We've come to make a film. I was told you know everything about these parts. I need your help." Jeremy raised his dull eyes to her. "I'm not the man you need, miss," he replied, his voice creaky and dry, like old leather. "I don't think you're right," Isabella smiled. "I see in you a man who has been through a lot, and I need stories, real ones, not made-up ones. I want our film to be true." Jeremy was silent. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel like an empty space. He felt that his pain had been seen, and that was unfamiliar. Isabella didn't insist. She just held out her hand to him. "I'll be waiting for you at the saloon tomorrow. Think about it." She left, leaving behind the delicate scent of perfume and a feeling of something new that had invaded his monochrome world. That evening, instead of whiskey, Jeremy, for the first time in 10 years, picked up the guitar that hung on the wall. He ran his fingers over the strings, and a hoarse but lively sound escaped from them. He wasn't playing, he wasn't singing, he was just listening to that sound, and something in his soul moved from a standstill. This was the first step, a step from despair towards something he couldn't yet name, but which already felt like hope. He thought about her words all night. "I need stories." His life was full of them. Stories of justice, of loss, of friendship, and of betrayal. Stories that he had hidden deep inside, so as not to feel the pain. But now he felt that maybe it was time to tell them. The film script that Isabella showed him the next day was full of cliques. It had nothing to do with real life in the Wild West. Isabella, shining in the light of the saloon, enthusiastically told stories about heroes who had never existed and about events that had never happened. "It's all fake," Jeremy said. "Life here isn't like that. There are no such heroes here, no such villains. There are just people trying to survive." Isabella listened to him without interrupting, her eyes full of interest. She saw that a deep wisdom was hidden behind his roughness. She saw in him not just an old gunfighter, but a chronicler, and this insight became the most important moment for her. She did what no one expected. She put the script aside. "Help me," she said to him. "Tell me the truth. Tell me about the people who live here, about what they feel. I want the world to see the real Wild West, not a made-up fairy tale." Jeremy looked at her. He saw in her eyes a sincerity he hadn't seen in a long time. At that moment, he realized that she was not just an actress. She was an artist who was looking for the truth. And he, the old gunfighter, could help her find it. And this realization became a hope for him. He realized that his life, his experience, his pain, all of it was not in vain. These were the bricks from which a new story could be built. A story that would not be like a made-up fairy tale, but would be truthful, honest, and would make people think. He nodded at her. It was a small gesture, but for him, it was equivalent to a decision to start living anew. And at that moment, he felt something inside him begin to come alive. His reconciliation with the past was the first step towards the future. "I agree," he said, "but I have one condition. We won't film about me. We'll film about the people who were around, about those who deserve to be known." "Agreed." Isabella smiled, her smile bright and sincere, like the morning sun. They began to work. Jeremy told stories, and Isabella wrote them down. He talked about Sarah, about her strength and wisdom. He talked about his friends, about their struggles and their losses. He talked about life as it really was, cruel and beautiful at the same time. And the more he talked, the more he freed himself from his pain. He was not just an old gunfighter, he was a storyteller, and in this role, he found a new meaning. Isabella listened to him with bated breath. She saw how her film was becoming something more than just entertainment. It was becoming a document, a testament to an era that was fading into the past. She realized that this story, told by the old gunfighter, would have a huge resonance, especially among those who remembered how hard it was to live back then. And so their collaboration began, a collaboration that would change not only their lives, but also the fate of the small town of Bright Creek. Jeremy, who just a couple of days ago was on the verge of despair, was now full of energy. His eyes shone again, and his hands, which once held only a revolver, were now busy writing the story he wanted to bring to the world. He wasn't just telling, he was creating, and this was the inspiration that brought him back to life. He realized that love hadn't left with Sarah. It had simply taken a new form, the form of inspiration that helped him live and move forward. Working on the film completely changed Jeremy's routine. Every day, under the scorching sun of the Wild West, he shared stories that had long lived only in his memory. He told Isabella about how he once helped a farmer fend off an attack by bandits on his cattle, and how, in gratitude, the farmer gave him his best stallion named Cowboy. Jeremy laughed, remembering how the stallion threw him every time he tried to get into the saddle, and Isabella, listening carefully, made notes in her notebook, her eyes sparkling with interest for every detail, every gesture, and every word of the old gunfighter was filled with a kind of life that was not in any script written for her in Hollywood. She saw that Jeremy was opening not just stories to her, but parts of his soul. Isabella, in turn, became a part of Jeremy's life. She often came to his ranch, sat in the creaky rocking chair where only he had sat recently, and drank black coffee. She was so unlike anyone he knew. Her refined manner of speaking, her light, melodic laugh, her ability to see beauty in the simplest things. All of this was new to him. She saw beauty in every sun-dried bush, in every stone, in every sunken face of the residents of Bright Creek. One of the characters Jeremy suggested including in the film was an old Indian named Matohanska, which translated to bear with horns. He was the last of his tribe, which had been exterminated by white settlers. Jeremy had once saved him from being lynched, and since then they had become friends, despite their cultural differences. Matohanska was a wise but silent man. In his eyes was a sadness that Jeremy had only seen in the mirror. Isabella wanted to meet him. Jeremy took her to his camp, which was located away from the town by a small river. Matohanska met them with a stone face. He didn't like strangers, especially white ones. Isabella tried to talk to him, but he only watched her silently, without answering. "He won't talk to you, miss," Jeremy said. "He doesn't trust white people. They took everything from him." Isabella lowered her eyes. She felt compassion for this man whose pain was so deep that it seemed incurable. And at that moment, she realized that she couldn't make this film without his participation. He was the key to the heart of the Wild West, a heart that was full of pain and sadness. She stayed alone when Jeremy left on his own business. Isabella just sat by the fire, not trying to speak. She just watched. She saw how Matohanska, despite his sadness, took care of the land, of the animals, how he carefully collected herbs. There was a grace and wisdom in his movements that no one else she knew possessed. She took brushes and paints from her bag, and she began to paint him. She painted his face, his wrinkles, his eyes, in which all the sunsets and sunrises he had seen were reflected. She painted his pain, his sadness, and his dignity. She painted him not as a savage, but as a man. Matohanska, seeing her, slowly approached. He looked over her shoulder, his eyes widening in surprise. He saw himself on the canvas. He saw in this drawing not only his image, but also his soul. He saw that she had seen him. She didn't try to change him, she just showed him the way he was. He nodded at her, and for the first time in many years, he said a few words in English, a language he had long forgotten. "You see," he said, his voice deep, like a clap of thunder. "You see me." This was a breakthrough. After that, they began to work together. Matohanska told her about his culture, about his people. He showed Isabella sacred places, told her legends that had been passed down from generation to generation. Isabella, in turn, shared with him stories from her world, from a world where there was a lot of noise and bustle, but where there were so few real stories. They became friends. Their friendship was the embodiment of insight, of the understanding that despite all the differences, people can find a common language if they are willing to see each other. Meanwhile, a new sheriff appeared in town. His name was Bartholomew Riggs. He was young, ambitious, and full of disdain for the elderly. He immediately disliked Jeremy, seeing in him only an old, senile gunfighter whose time had long passed. Bartholomew was the epitome of contempt. He didn't respect Jeremy for his past. He despised him for his present. "Your fairy tales aren't worth a dime, old man," he once said to Jeremy. "This film is just a farce. They'll make a laughingstock out of you. And I'll bring order here. Real order, not the one you had." Jeremy paid no attention to him. He knew that people like Bartholomew would always be there. They would come and go, and life would go on. But Bartholomew didn't want it to go on. He wanted power, and he believed that to get it, he had to destroy the symbol of the old order, a symbol that for him was Jeremy. The story's climax began when a bank robbery occurred in town. Bartholomew, taking advantage of the opportunity, decided to accuse Matohanska, the only Indian in the county. "He's a savage," he said. "He's a thief. They're all like that. I saw him going into the mountains. He clearly hid the loot there." Bartholomew gathered a crowd. The people, intoxicated by his speeches, were ready to lynch Matohanska without waiting for a trial. Jeremy, hearing about it, couldn't stand by. He took his old Colt, which had been inoperative for so long, and went to the center of town. Isabella, seeing what was happening, was scared. "Jeremy, don't," she cried. "They'll kill you." "I can't abandon a friend, Isabella," he replied. "A real man never abandons a friend. Yes, I'm old, but I can still protect someone I care about." He went out into the square where the crowd, led by Bartholomew, stood. He stood between them and Motto Hanska. "This man is innocent," Jeremy said. "I know him. He couldn't have done it." "He's lying," Bartholomew shouted. "He's covering for him. This is his last fight, and he'll lose it." Bartholomew drew his revolver. Jeremy also drew his. 2 generations, 2 worlds, clashed at that moment. The old, wise gunfighter who defended honor and justice, and the young, ambitious sheriff who wanted power. Isabella stood aside and watched. She felt her heart pounding in her chest. She saw in Jeremy not just an old man, but a hero, and this inspiration filled her soul. At that moment, Motto Hanska, taking advantage of the pause, began to speak. He spoke in his language, but Isabella understood every word. She saw that he was not just speaking, he was singing. He was telling her that at that time he was on the other side of the river, where he was praying to the spirits of his ancestors. Isabella, without hesitation, began to translate his words. "He wasn't there. He was in another place. He's innocent. He's telling his truth. This is his truth." Bartholomew was furious. He was ready to shoot Motto Hanska, but he couldn't do it. The crowd, which had been ready for a lynching, froze. They heard the words Isabella was saying and saw how the old Indian's face had changed. They saw in him not a savage, but a human being. At that moment, when the tension reached its peak, Jeremy lowered his revolver. Bartholomew, seeing this, began to laugh. "You've lost, old man," he said. But at that moment, an old drunkard, who was known to everyone in the town, came out from behind Jeremy's back. He was staggering, but in his hands was a bag that he had brought with him. "I did it," he said. "I robbed the bank." The crowd froze. Bartholomew lowered his revolver. He was in shock. His plan had failed. His power had collapsed. Jeremy and Motto Hanska walked out of the crowd. They looked at each other, and in their eyes, there was neither joy nor malice, only reconciliation. Jeremy realized that his life, his pain, his experience, all of it was not in vain. He was not only able to help a friend, he was able to prove to everyone that honor and justice still existed in this Wild West. Bartholomew was arrested, and the drunkard received his deserved punishment. Jeremy and Isabella continued to work on the film. This incident became a new chapter for them, a new confirmation that their story was not just a fiction, but the truth of life. Jeremy, sitting on his porch, watched the sunset. There was a calmness in his soul. He realized that his life had not ended with Sarah's departure. It had simply changed, and this new life, full of new stories, new friends, and new adventures, was no less beautiful. He accepted his new path, and this was his liberation. Since then, Jeremy and Isabella have become close friends. She helped him find meaning in life, and he helped her find truth in art. And their story, the story of an old gunfighter and a young actress, became a legend that will live forever. The events in Bright Creek quickly spread throughout the Wild West. The story of how an old marshal and a Hollywood star exposed a corrupt sheriff became a real sensation. Journalists from all over the country began to come to the film set. Isabella, who was accustomed to attention, now used it to emphasize how important the truth Jeremy was telling was to her. Every report began and ended with a mention of the old gunfighter who had found his voice again. Isabella was inspired by this story. She felt that her career was gaining a new, deeper meaning. However, not everyone was happy with this commotion. Across the river, in the neighboring town of Dole Creek, lived Jeremy's old enemy, Clayton McCoy. Once, in the distant past, Jeremy, as a marshal, put McCoy's brother in prison for robbery and murder. McCoy's brother escaped and took revenge by taking the most valuable thing Jeremy had, his family. But Jeremy was sure that this was McCoy's doing. And now, when he found out that Jeremy was back in the game, Clayton felt a surge of hatred. He couldn't accept that his family's enemy was back in the spotlight. Clayton was not just a bandit. He was a man who believed in his own rules, his own truth. He believed that the law was just a tool for the weak, and that strength and power were the only truth. In his eyes, Jeremy was a hypocrite who used the law to commit lawlessness. He was convinced that Jeremy had killed his brother, and the anger flared up in his heart with new force. He decided to come to Bright Creek and talk to Jeremy in person, not to find out the truth, but to deliver a final, cowardly blow. The two old enemies met in the saloon. All the patrons froze. The air was filled with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Clayton was tall and muscular. Hatred gleamed in his eyes. "I hear, old Cullen, you've become a star," Clayton sneered. "Now you tell fairy tales about honor and justice. Doesn't that seem funny to you, especially after you yourself killed my brother?" Jeremy raised his eyes to him. He saw not hatred in them, but pain. He knew that Clayton had experienced loss, just as he had, and he felt compassion for him. He knew that his pain had become the catalyst for his hatred. "I didn't kill your brother, Clayton," Jeremy said. "I was just following the law." "The law? What law?" "Yours, the one you make up yourself." Clayton laughed, but there was pain in his laughter. "You took my brother from me, and then I took your family, so you could feel what it's like. Now you tell stories about honor. Aren't you ashamed?" At that moment, when Clayton revealed his main secret, Jeremy felt something inside him break. He couldn't believe his ears, his pain, his despair, his eternal struggle with the ghosts of the past. All of this was Clayton's doing. He felt anger welling up in his soul, but he held it back. He knew that now was not the time for emotions. Now was the time to think. Isabella, who was watching this scene from the side, was shocked. She knew that Jeremy had a difficult past, but she couldn't have imagined that there was such a tragedy in his life. She saw in Clayton not just a villain, but a man who had also experienced loss. "You're lying," Jeremy said. "You just want to hurt me." "Lying." Clayton took an old, yellowed photograph from his pocket. It was Sarah. Jeremy's shock was indescribable. He looked at the photograph, and all the terrible moments associated with the loss of his wife rushed through his mind, and he realized that all these years he had been in the dark. "Now do you understand?" Clayton asked, and there was gloating in his eyes. "Did you think I wouldn't dare? You took my brother from me, and I took everything that was dear to you." Jeremy, unable to bear it, lunged at Clayton. A fight broke out between them. Jeremy, despite his age, was strong and full of anger, but Clayton was younger and faster. He was beating Jeremy. At that moment, when it seemed that Jeremy had lost, Isabella, risking her life, rushed between them. "Stop," she cried. "This is not the answer. Pain is not healed by pain. Clayton, look at him. He's just like you. He's lost everything too." Clayton stopped. He looked at Isabella, and in her eyes, he saw not fear, but compassion. He saw in her what he didn't see in himself: mercy. He lowered his hands. Jeremy got up. He was beaten, but not broken. He looked at Clayton, and there was no longer hatred in his eyes. There was only pain. "I knew you were involved," Jeremy said, "but I couldn't prove it. Now that you've confessed, you'll get what you deserve." Clayton was arrested. The story of how the old gunfighter found his enemy and how a young actress helped him triumph spread throughout the Wild West. This incident was included in the film as the final chapter, as the concluding chord that showed that true strength is not in a gun, but in forgiveness and the ability to move forward despite the pain. Jeremy and Isabella finished filming. Now, a premiere awaited them in Hollywood, but the most important thing they gained was not fame, but reconciliation with the past. Jeremy realized that he couldn't get Sarah back, but he could honor her memory by creating this film that would tell people the truth about life. The premiere of the film Bright Creek Sunset took place in Los Angeles, in a luxurious cinema where all of high society had gathered. Isabella Montgomery dazzled on the red carpet, her name on the lips of every critic, but the main star of the evening sat modestly, away from the spotlights. It was Jeremy Cullen. He looked uncomfortable in a strict suit, but his eyes no longer had the former longing. He was inspired. He saw how his life, his pain, his experience had turned into something beautiful, into a work of art. When the first shots appeared on the screen, silence fell in the hall. The story of the old gunfighter and his friends, told with such sincerity, with such love, made people freeze. They saw not fictional heroes, but real people who lived, loved, suffered, and fought. They saw Motto Hansker's pain and his compassion for the world. They saw Jeremy's anger and his reconciliation with the past. Every scene, every dialogue was so truthful that the audience forgot that it was just a film. They felt the pain of the heroes, their despair, and then their hope. When the film ended, there was a deathly silence in the hall, and then thunderous applause erupted. People stood up, applauding not only the director and actors, but also Jeremy himself. He was a hero, not a hired killer, not a revenger, but a storyteller who showed everyone what true strength of spirit is. After the premiere, people, old and young, approached Jeremy and thanked him. They said that this film helped them look at their lives and their problems in a new way. They said that it gave them inspiration, and that was the most important thing for Jeremy. He realized that his life, his experience, his suffering, all of it was not in vain. He found a new meaning, a new purpose, and this was his rebirth. Jeremy did not stay in Hollywood. He returned to Bright Creek. He sat on his porch again, but this time not alone. Isabella was with him. She had turned down new roles to stay by Jeremy's side. She realized that in this small town, next to this old gunfighter, she felt more alive than in the glitter of Hollywood. She was not Sarah. She was Isabella, and Jeremy no longer compared them. He accepted her for who she was. Her love, her care, her striving for the truth. All of this was the new meaning of his life. He wasn't trying to replace the past. He was simply creating a new future. There was no longer longing in his eyes. There was calmness. He felt that his struggle with the past was over. He was free. He was liberated from his pain. Conclusion: this story is about how a man who lost everything finds a new meaning in life. Jeremy Cullen, like many of us, fell into the trap of his pain and despair. He allowed his past to define his future. But meeting Isabella became a catalyst for change for him. She helped him understand that love and life don't go away forever. They just change their form. As in the modern world, many elderly people, having experienced loss or tragedy, withdraw into themselves. They stop living, they just exist. But this story teaches us that regardless of age, regardless of the suffering we have experienced, there is always an opportunity to start over. You just need to open your heart, stop being afraid of the new, and find the strength to share your experience with others. Because sometimes, to heal yourself, you need to heal another. The story of Jeremy and Isabella shows that the most valuable stories are those that come from the heart, and that love, in the end, always wins.